Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Yoga with Joelle. And today I want to talk about hip bursitis, specifically what it is, my own experience with it, what are some of the causes of it, and what are some of the things we can do about it. And I'll also tell you about a suggested 4-week program using the different hip bursitis follow-along routines that are available on my channel, including my very first and still most popular video, as well as a brand new one that's going to be coming out 2 days from now. So let's get started. Now, a quick disclaimer, this video is not intended to be medical advice or a diagnosis for anyone. It's just intended to be general education. So if you think you may have hip bursitis or if you're struggling with hip pain, then please do go consult your medical professional for advice. So first up, what is hip bursitis? Simply put, bursitis is an inflammation of the bursa, which are these tiny fluid-filled sacs that we have around joints like our shoulders, our knees, our elbows, and our hips. And the bursas serve as a type of cushion that try to reduce the friction between our bones and our tissues while we're moving around. And while there are a number of bursa located around our hip joint, the most common one to get inflamed is the greater trochanteric bursa, which is located to the outside of the lower part of the hip. Which is why when we talk about hip bursitis, we're usually talking about trochanteric bursitis, which is quite a mouthful. Essentially, hip bursitis manifests itself as pain. Typically pain to the outside of the hip, sometimes quite sharp pain, like when we're doing motions like standing up out of a chair or pulling the knee towards the chest, or even just lying down on the affected side, like when we're lying down in bed. And simple movements like squatting or climbing stairs, or even just long periods of walking may become more difficult. So how does hip bursitis happen? Hip bursitis can be brought on in different ways in different people. For example, someone who's had a previous hip injury or surgery of some kind might develop hip bursitis. But it could also just be caused by repetitive stress, friction, pressure, or just general wear and tear in that part of the body. Like for people who run a lot or cycle a lot or just do different types of activities that tend to overuse certain muscle groups around the hip. For me, I actually developed hip bursitis when I started a completely different style of yoga a few years ago, and I ramped up really quickly and started practicing 6 days a week for an hour and a half, and very quickly my right hip just couldn't take it anymore. Now that is not at all saying that yoga causes hip bursitis, by the way, it's just that I personally ramped up too quickly with much more aggressiveness than what my body was used to. Sometimes our bodies just need time to adapt to new forms of activities, which is why it's so important to always listen to our bodies, notice if anything isn't quite feeling right or if something starts hurting, and that's what I didn't do at the time. And after consulting with my doctor, I ended up having a steroid injection into the bursa of my right hip, which in my case ended up only being a short-term fix, and my bursitis kept coming back again and again. So it wasn't until I started a daily program of exercises for about 10 minutes a day that I really started to feel better long-term. Again, this doesn't mean that steroid injections won't work for anybody. Many people do experience long-term relief with steroid injections or even just by taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen. But what worked for me was a combination of stretching and strengthening moves that I developed that took me about 10 minutes a day, and where I really just paid attention to how I felt before, during, and after I had done them. So what kind of moves and exercises can we do to help with hip bursitis? Essentially, we want to be stretching that area on the side of the hip, as well as into the IT band and glute to maintain strength and flexibility and over time reduce the friction that's causing us pain. We can do this with stretches like a figure 4, also known as a pigeon stretch, to get really deep into the muscles. And by combining this with exercises that strengthen the glutes and the muscles around the upper parts of the legs like baby squats, hip bridges, and leg raises. These types of moves can be found in my series of videos for hip bursitis and hip pain, which now has 10-minute supine, seated, and standing sequences, as well as a 20-minute ultimate sequence. I'm very gratified that these videos have gotten many positive comments from viewers who say that these sequences have helped them with their hip bursitis and hip pain. One question I've gotten recently is whether these moves should be done when experiencing bursitis, so in other words, when we're actually in pain, or if this should be done as a preventative measure in order to prevent the pain from occurring. The short answer is both. So if you are experiencing hip pain right now, then these types of sequences should definitely help you if you do them regularly. But even if your hip bursitis hasn't been actively flaring up quite as much recently, it's still not a bad idea to do these sequences 1 or 2 times a week as a preventative measure. This is actually what I do because I know that my right hip is prone to chronic bursitis and I want to prevent that from flaring up again. I also wanted to mention another video for hip bursitis and hip pain that I'll have coming out 2 days from now, which is going to be a yin style 30-minute yoga class. For those of you who are not familiar with yin yoga, it's a style where we hold certain poses for long periods of time, up to several minutes, which allows us to stretch really deeply into the connective tissues of the body. And this helps make those connective tissues longer, stronger, and more flexible without putting them under any stress like we do in other forms of exercise. So if you're wondering how to combine all of these different videos in order to manage your own hip pain, I've put together a 4-week suggested program on how to use them, especially if you're just starting out. So for week 1, I want you to start with the 10-minute supine routine and try that 5 times in the first week. You can fit it into the beginning of your day or the end of your day or whenever you have a little 10-minute nugget of time throughout the day. And do what you can. So if you need to take breaks or if you only make it through the first 5 minutes on day 1, no problem. Come back to it and see if on day 2 you can get through 6 minutes. And before you know it, by the end of the week, you'll be getting through the entire thing. After that, in week 2, I'd recommend alternating between the supine routine, which we did in week 1, and the sitting routine. So alternate between those two 5 times in week 2. Then in week 3, we'll be adding the standing routine into our repertoire and rotating that one in as well. And finally, in week 4, we're going to be rotating in the 20-minute ultimate hip bursitis sequence, which goes through a combination of supine, seated, and standing exercises and stretches. The reason I suggest mixing it up with different routines like this is so that our bodies don't get too used to doing exactly the same exercises each and every day, but also to prove to ourselves that we can progress, that you can do sequences and exercises that may have been very, very difficult even just a few short weeks prior. Now you might be wondering how to fit in this new 30-minute yin yoga routine. So already in week 1, I want you to try adding this in once a week. Make a commitment to yourself that every Saturday for 4 weeks or every Sunday for 4 weeks or whenever works best for you, you will set aside a 30-minute time slot to take care of yourself and give your body a chance to relax into these poses. So when you put all of these together, this makes for a very comprehensive 4-week program, and I truly hope that it will help you feel better in your hips. And if you didn't get all of that, don't worry, I will put the full description of the 4-week program in the description box below this video, as well as links to all of my previous hip bursitis sequences. If you haven't already had a chance to subscribe to my channel, do make sure to do so below so that you can join me in 2 days' time for that new yin yoga sequence. And again, a huge thank you to anyone who's already provided comments or feedback or even donations to help support my work. I'm truly grateful for it. And let me know if you'd like a similar video on any other topics. This has been it for episode 2 of Joelle's Corner, and I will put a link in the upper right-hand corner of your screen in case you'd like to watch episode 1 to find out how much money I make on YouTube or what it's like to be a yoga teacher on YouTube. I truly hope this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again soon in one of my next videos. Thank you for watching, and namaste.